Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm the youngest of Debbie's 3 daughters, and I wanted to share my story with you today about how I became set free from spiritual bondage. I grew up in a small town in southern Arkansas. I was born in 1988, and I was the youngest of 3 girls. Both of my parents were at home. They were married until I was an adult, so I didn't come from a broken home or anything like that. There was no drug abuse, no alcohol abuse. There was no major issues like that. We were just a happy family, and me and my sisters were always close. We fought like siblings do, but we were close. My dad worked every day. My mom was a real estate agent for a long time, but she was home with us a lot too, and she worked very hard. They both worked hard. When I was a child, I had a very big personality. My mom often described me as flamboyant or effervescent. I was very wild and loved everything colorful and sparkly, and I was always playing dress up. I played dress up so much that, at certain points my mom would put all my clothes in my closet and lock the door to keep me from changing clothes 400 times a day. My parents were both good parents, but there were definitely things that they fell short on a little bit. There were times when my dad would come home from work and I would kind of parade around in front of him, tossing my hair and being a flirtatious child, trying to get my father's attention, and he would not respond at all. And I would do it every day until finally I just kind of quit trying, because I knew it would not issue any kind of a response. As I grew into a preteen, every preteen has kind of a phase, a period of time where certain parts of their body are beginning to grow and the rest hasn't kind of caught up, and it's what we call the awkward phase. And as a preteen, I had a very long and very bad awkward phase. It began when I was probably 11 or 12, and it lasted until I was probably 16 or 17. And my mom I had 2 older sisters, and they were both teenagers and cheerleaders and had so much going on and so much happening, and she kind of had her hands full with them, that she felt like their needs were more urgent. And so she was kind of busy helping them, and I don't think anybody really realized that I needed help. And my mom did the best that she could. She was just very busy all the time, and my dad didn't take much notice at all, except to maybe point out that I was maybe had a few pounds that I didn't need to have. I had a really hard time making friends. I always felt like I was a little bit different than everyone else. Even though I had such a big personality when I was little, at some point in time I began to turn inward, and the more I turned inward, I kind of put a gag on my personality so that nothing really came out. I was just quiet all the time. I began to build these walls around my heart, and the higher my walls got, the thicker they got, the more I just kind of shut myself in. I kind of shut my personality in to the point that I didn't really even know what my personality was anymore. And I had a hard time making friends. I felt like I wasn't really liked. I felt like I was kind of living in the shadow of my sisters, who were both beautiful and thin and had tons of friends and were popular at school and were just flourishing. Maybe not in the most healthy way. They were both rebels, but they at least were fitting in at school, and I just was this outcast, and just felt like I didn't fit in at home, I didn't fit in at school, I didn't really fit in anywhere. By the time I was in my teen years, my parents were fighting a lot, and it was not usually done in quiet. My dad's job was very high stress, and he would come home. My sisters and I got to the point where we were kind of walking on eggshells when he was home, because he tended to kind of explode over the smallest things. And so him and my mom would fight a lot, and so home was not always very peaceful. I mean, even when he wasn't there, it seemed like there was just kind of a tension in the house. And so there was just not really any place where I felt just at peace and felt comfortable or felt like I fit in. There was just really very little joy in my life. And until I met my first boyfriend when I was 16. We dated for 3 years, and he was a great guy. He treated me very well, but I still wasn't fully myself with him. I mean, my personality was still so shut up inside me that I really wasn't me. But we had a good relationship, and we talked about getting married, and we were going to get married, and it never occurred to me that it might not happen until I was 19, and I had my life was together. I had my boyfriend. I was working a job at a law firm, and I was attending classes at the local community college. I had bought a nice car, and had a credit card, and just really felt like I had my life together, and things were going really well. But I still felt like something inside me was not right. And it still just felt like I still felt alone. And then when I was 19, my boyfriend broke up with me. I was quite a bit clingy, and the more I clung, the more he pulled away, until he finally broke up with me, and I did not take it very well. I kind of went into I don't want to say a spiral, but it kind of was a spiral. I quit my job. I lost my car. I quit taking classes. Actually, I failed out of my classes. I basically gave up on everything. A couple of months after we broke up, we were fighting about something. I think I was being awful, but at any rate, he said something to me. He said that he would rather be with someone who had half a personality than someone who was, and I'll paraphrase here, nothing more than a collection of nice body parts. And even though I knew he did not mean that, even though logically I knew he didn't mean it, those words buried themselves in my heart, and I carried them around with me for about the next 10 years. It was during this time that I sought relief from my pain through male attention and fake affection. I began to develop really unhealthy relationship habits, and kind of sought self-validation, and kind of tried to create a self-worth through guys. And of course, a few months later, I became pregnant with my son, and his father did not care about me and did not care about my son. To this day, he is not in our lives, and that's okay. We're okay with that. After my son was born, I really kind of worked on pulling my life together, or pulling it back together. I stayed away from men. I wasn't dating or doing anything like that. I stayed home with him for about 18 months, and then I got a job, and I was given a car. It was a lemon, but it was free, and I started just really kind of focusing on me and getting healthy, mentally healthy again, and emotionally healthy. And I started going back to church, and I rededicated my life to the Lord, and really just tried to make big changes. But even then, I still just felt like something was missing, and I still felt like I was seeking, even chasing after God, because I know that God can fill any void that we have. But even chasing after God, I still felt like there was something that I was lacking, and there was something that I needed. After some time, after a few years, I began to kind of flirt with the idea of dating again. And of course, as soon as I re-entered that dating pool, my old unhealthy habits resurfaced. And over the next few years, I really just worked so hard at trying to find someone who would love me. And I tried being different versions of myself, but it always kind of reverted back to my personality. I felt like my personality is the reason that I was unlovable. And so with each new guy that I dated, I would try something new. I would try to be more sassy, or I would try to be more sweet, or I would try to be more just fun, or whatever. I would try all these different things, and of course none of them worked, and it would always end the same. And so after a certain amount of time, I just kind of came to the point that I had just determined that my sexuality was just the only thing that I had to offer. I felt like the more I tried to connect with someone, the more I tried to seek that affection, the farther that I got. And it got to the point, where I was asking myself why. I asked myself why so often that I felt like it was a constant question in my mind. I began to make mental lists of my positive attributes because I felt like I needed to remind myself of what I had to offer. When I was 31 years old, I had just gone through a particularly bad heartbreak, and I was so broken and so exhausted that I went to my mom, and I just was crying to her, and just telling her, I remember telling her I was tired of being strong. And I just cried, and we talked. And about 10 years prior, my mom had began to tell me about something that God had been taking her through. And he had walked her through this process and set her free from what she called a heart bondage. And she told me all about it, and told me that she had received it in childhood over some things that had been spoken over her by her parents. And my mom's childhood was a little bit messier than mine. And so as she would tell me about it, I didn't really relate. I didn't think that I had a heart bondage because, I felt like I had great parents. And even though my childhood was not exactly perfect, I didn't feel like there was anything in it that would lead to me being in any kind of bondage. But that night, as we talked, and as I cried, and as she just ministered to me, I began to realize that that thing that I had felt was so wrong with me was a heart bondage. And she had been writing a book for probably the last 8 years. She had been spending on writing this book. At the time, it wasn't titled, but I started reading it, and I started making my way through the material. And it is a 7-step process I began to start reading through the material, and immediately I felt things happening. I felt like God was working. I felt things lifting off of me. It was really amazing how quickly I began to feel things changing. I made it about 2/3 of the way through the material, and one of the guy who had just broken my heart kind of came back wanting to work things out again, and I foolishly believed that he had changed, and so I also felt like I could continue reading through the Freedom class material while still trying to date him on the side. And of course, neither of those things were true. He had not changed, and I could not continue the Freedom class while I was dating someone. So I did end up putting the material down for about a year. It was not quite a year, I don't think. But of course, he ended up breaking my heart again. I sank into this deep depression. I was ashamed that I had come so close to my freedom and walked away so easily. And I was still just as alone and hurt and just as much pain as I had been before. And so I reached this place where my emotions were all over the place. It got so bad. I remember both of my sisters are nurses, and I remember talking to each one of them about what kind of medication I could possibly take to kind of stabilize my moods and my emotions, because it was so bad that I remember a few times wondering if maybe I was crazy. My emotions were just wild, and I had a hard time getting myself out of bed. I would lay in bed and I would eat junk food, and I was just very depressed. And finally, my mom, I think she gave me some time to kind of sort through my feelings. But then after so long, she began to not so gently nudge me back towards the Freedom class, and I resisted at first, but I eventually gave in, and I picked up right where I had left off. I was not sure if I would need to go back and start over, or if I would be able to pick up where I left off, but it became apparent pretty quickly that I had not lost any of the ground that I had covered. I had not reverted back to my old ways. I just picked up where I left off, and God began to work again. And it was about November of 2020. I had reached the trust step, the trust chapter, or the trust step, and I struggled with that one because I had just had a really hard time telling God that I would trust Him with my whole life and do whatever He said. I mean, that's a big promise to make, and so I hesitated. And Mom tried to talk me through it, but I remember it was a Sunday morning, and I was sitting in church service. It was in the middle of the sermon. It wasn't even like during praise and worship. It was just in the middle of the sermon. The sermon wasn't even about trusting God. It was about something totally different. But I just felt this tug around my midsection. I felt like simultaneously, there was something wrapped around my midsection and also a tug. And I knew immediately that it was God saying, okay, it's time. And I wasn't excited about it. I really didn't want to, but I said, okay, God, I trust you. And even though I wasn't excited about it, when I said it, I meant it. And so that's what I did. And for the first couple of weeks after that, I think that I expected, after I made that promise, I think I expected there to be some kind of revelation or something, and there wasn't. And so for a couple of weeks, I didn't really feel anything happening. So I wasn't sure if I had done it right, but I just decided to continue on with the material. And the next step was the hope step. And I remember when I started reading Hope, immediately, I mean, within just like the first couple of pages, I realized that God had been giving me visions over the last couple of weeks about my purpose and my future. I just hadn't realized at the time that that's what they were. And so I jumped up. I had been laying in bed reading the material, and I jumped out of bed, and I was so excited. And so it was about December of 2020 when I had finished reading the material, and I was kind of waiting. I knew that Mom and some other people that had been through her class had gotten, they had had like a demonstrative freedom moment, if that's what you want to call it. You know, they knew the moment that they were set free because there was some kind of act, and they felt it break off, or whatever happened to each, you know, each person's different. And for me, I kept waiting on something like that to happen, and it didn't. So after a couple of weeks or so, I began to, instead of asking God for my freedom, I began to thank God for my freedom and just claim it as mine. And it was in December of 2020, then it just kind of dawned on me one day. It was actually, again, it was during service. The pastor was talking about forgiveness, and he was talking about those people in your past that you have a hard time forgiving. And he said, you know who I'm talking about, because he said, as soon as I say that, someone comes to mind. And I realized that of all the people that had hurt me, no one was coming to mind. I didn't really, I would think back. I mean, I was even kind of trying to think of someone that I didn't forgive, and I was thinking of all the people that had hurt me, but I realized that my past, my story, didn't even seem like mine. I almost felt kind of disconnected from it, like it was not even my past. It was a story that someone else had told me, and so it was almost like I remember it secondhand. And I just kind of started to ponder on that, and I began to realize that I was thinking like a free person, and I was acting like a free person, and I felt like a free person, and I just kind of realized I was free. For a time after that, everything was just different. I was like on cloud 9, and I was just filled with such a joy. When I was not free, anytime I felt any kind of joy or happiness, it was always tied to something else. It was always because there was some guy who was giving me attention, or I thought that he liked me, or there was always some reason that I was happy. But this joy that I was feeling, it wasn't tied to anything. I was just joyful all the time. Everything around me looked so different. I realized I was seeing things differently. I understood things differently. I even began to see other people differently. Everything was different, and it was hard for me to understand how people were just going about their day like nothing had changed, because to me everything had changed, and I couldn't understand why no one else saw this change like I did. When I began the freedom class, I did not think that it would really work for me. I don't think that I consciously knew that, but subconsciously I did not believe it would work for me. Mom had had classes. She had had some people that had read through the material and that had gotten their freedom, so I knew that her material worked. But still, I just didn't believe that it would work for me. And so when I began reading the material, like I said before, it was really almost instantaneous, the feeling of something happening. And I remember asking Mom if I could if my heart bondage could come off in pieces, because I felt lighter throughout the whole process. Even from the beginning, I almost felt things falling off. I can't imagine where I would be or what I would do with the rest of my life if I had not had the freedom class, if I had not obtained my freedom. My life is forever changed. And even if you think that the freedom class won't work for you, or even if you think you might not have a heart bondage, if you feel like there's something about you that's different than everyone else, or you feel like you're lesser than everyone else, get a copy of Instead of Shame and just begin to read it, because you may realize within just the first few pages that this is what you needed, and you will connect with it. If you need it, you will connect with it almost instantly. Mom always says that the freedom class is not a fix-all for your problems, and it's not. I still have my share of problems and my share of things to work on, but being ashamed of who I am is not one of those things, and it never will be again, and I will never stop thanking God for that. Thank you for watching this video and allowing me to share my story with you.